Hello, girls, gays, and Freddy Fazbear, because you're a special little guy. Now, I want to talk to you guys about one of my favorite shows that Netflix canceled. I know it's been a minute, sorry about that. And this video is going to be long, so sorry about that as well. Let me tell you what happens when you've got a side character best friend with a terrible boyfriend. A side character obsessed with figuring out why the main character is who she is, and a main character that's got a dead father, scary powers, and a crush on her best friend. It ends on the worst cliffhanger. That's what you get. A cliffhanger that lasts forever because Netflix cancels shows. That's what they're popular for. Besides, having terrible prices as of now, it really could have been a popular show, honestly. I'm Not Okay with This was an amazing show. And it really should have gone on to have a second season that fully fleshed out the characters and finished the story in a satisfying way. They could have ended it in a satisfying way if they had ended it like the comics. But Netflix has never been good at following source material. And if they had gone on with that, we could have had an amazing season two. Done a lot of research, can't find what they had planned for it, but I did see that the showrunner wanted to, edit the last, minute of I'm Not Okay with This to end in a more ambiguous way rather than a let's go on to season two way, you know? Netflix canceled it though, and they didn't even let him change the ending like he wanted. So, if Netflix keeps canceling shows like this, they're gonna end up looking like my notes app, full of unfinished stories that nobody wants to even bother watching. So, I would recommend you watch the show before finishing the video. Should have done that before you clicked on the video, but oh well. I'm gonna get into spoiler territory now. So, if you don't want that, go watch it. Sail the high seas if you need to. Watch the show, honestly. It's great. But I think the best way to figure out what could have been added, what could have, really enhanced the story is talking about the show through the lens of how Sid interacted with the other characters, like her best friend, like her mom, like her brother. So let's get into it. Sid introduces Dina as her best friend, her first true best friend on top of that, and the one person she talks to outside of her family. Over the course of the show, they start drifting away due to Dina's boyfriend, which we'll elaborate on later, due to Sid realizing she has some unknown powers that she can't quite control, and Sid finding out she kind of has a crush on her best friend. It really sucks. But to the first point, to elaborate a little more so you guys understand, Brad sucks. That's Dina's boyfriend, if you didn't realize. Anyways, Brad sucks. He is not a great guy. He gets an ankle injury at a football game and then later shows up at a party where Dina and Sid are hanging out and kind of guilt trips Dina into leaving Sid, who, she goes find something else to do. And then she comes back to find Dina and they had an argument because he wanted to take her away from having fun at a party that he shouldn't have been at anyways because he had an ankle injury. But whatever, I guess. So Dina and Sid talk. Sid helps Dina feel better, and then she kisses her. Dina isn't very receptive to it, and Sid runs off and has a little outburst in the woods where her powers kind of set off and break a couple trees. Now, some time passes. Dina, Sid, Brad, and Stanley all get detention. Sid and Dina have talked and realize that they're okay, but now they're in detention and someone else that's in detention that is not really a important character um sets Sid off and she goes off to cool off in the library. She's walking around and she feels like someone's following her. She can see a shadow, she can kind of see it. She's walking around until the anxiety and the pressure just gets to too much, and once again her powers kind of go haywire and destroy the library. So after, realizing what's happened, she turns and sees a camera and decides that she needs Stanley and Dina's help to, you know, get into the principal's office, steal the footage, and make sure that no one finds out about what's going on. The plan that Stan comes up with goes off without a hitch, kind of, and they figure it out. They're cool. Next, Sid goes to the bathroom and finds Brad in the girls' locker room talking to the girl who set her off earlier, causing, having a little bit of a conversation about, well, no, you can't tell Dina. What we did was a mistake. And the girl's like, how is it a mistake? You completed twice. Like, come on now. And he realizes Sid's been listening and is like, no, you can't tell Dina. But when Dina comes in and asks, of course Sid's going to tell the truth. Why would she lie to her best friend? But then Brad kind of threatens her, but we don't talk about that till later. After, Dina asks about what they were stealing for reals, and Sid can't answer, they have a little separation. Sid, you know, goes through a little other things, and then when you come back to school, Dina's talking to her again and it's like, I'm sorry for lashing out so much. I get that sometimes there are things that we can't tell each other even though we're best friends. And everything is kind of solved. And they just have to go to homecoming together, which is really cute. But homecoming will be its own little section on here. So let's move on to the next character, Stanley. Sid introduces Stan as the guy who lives down the street from her. It's obvious that he's interested, but she's not very receptive to that, whether it's because she's just not into him or she doesn't notice. I personally don't know. Sid, tries to keep him at arm's length until they go to the store together. She needs help getting her groceries home, and it ends up being that she can't afford it. And Stan, he tries to help her pay for it. She refuses the help, and then her powers kind of give her an outburst, and she runs away. He picks her back up, and they go back to his house. They smoke, do the horizontal tango. Obviously, Sid wasn't too interested, but she did tell Dina and acted all really happy about it because she was only doing it to catch up with Dina. After that, Stan's obviously still very interested in her. She's very awkward about it. They have a little argument later about homecoming. After he's helped her steal the footage from the library, he thinks that nothing else is really a problem. But Sid has to deal with Brad being mad at her, Dina being mad at her, and just a whole bunch of other things that are stressing her out at the moment. Problems with her mom, her brother was mad at her for a moment, and it's just like not the time to talk about it for her, but Stan's not noticing. Stan's very in his own head at the moment, and when she doesn't respond in the way that makes him happy, he gets really upset and it's like, "Well, I'll find another homecoming date." And she's like, "Fine, then go do that." And he does, but well, we'll see how that goes. Sid and her mom have a pretty, argumentative relationship. Sid's mom has no patience for the way that Sid is lashing out with being snarky when being told to do things or, just having this general attitude. There are moments where I think Sid's mom could do better. Just in general, not every parent's going to react entirely the best way when their kid has a problem, but there are little things. Like there's a time where Sid says, "Oh, I had to talk to the therapist today," and her mom asks why, and she says, "Well, I feel like the people I love don't love me back." And instead of her mom asking, "Oh, why? Oh, is it about your dad who jumped off the flat earth like last year?" And instead of responding with any of those, her mom says, "Maybe you're aiming too high, hun," which is not a response that you should be giving your teenage daughter when she says that after she's went through something really traumatic like that. I just don't understand where that came from. But then again, her mom may be separating herself from the idea of her husband having passed away recently. There are many moments where her mom doesn't bring it up, where it could be something that is talked about, and instead they both avoid the situation, which is understandable. It's a very hard situation for anyone to go through, whether you're the husband, the child of, or just a friend of someone who has done such a thing. I just I just think that like of course there are things her mom could have done better, but Sid's also pretty annoying. It's a little hard sometimes to side with Sid, but their relationship does get better and it does make me happy, and it really makes me sad that it couldn't have developed even more in a possible season 2. Oh my god. But let's let's move on to the next relationship that Sid has, and on to learning about Sid and her brother, which is a very positive relationship. Sid's brother kind of gives her a reprieve from all the stressful things in her life. She can just relax around him. She doesn't have to, you know, put up a front around him. She doesn't have to lie to get him to, you know, pay attention or like her in a way like she does with Dina. She can just exist. And what's really great is it's not just for her benefit. She supports him in everything he does in his creative endeavors. And, when he tries out cooking for the first time and mixes a bunch of random things from the fridge together, she tries it and she gives him encouraging words. And it, it looks gross, but she says it's good. I don't trust her. It's fine. You know, her brother giving her this reprieve from all the struggles of life is apparent when she's having an outburst at school and she doesn't want to, destroy the bathroom or something. So when she's telling herself to calm down, to think positively, she thinks of her brother first and hanging out with him and how, their relationship is. I really think it's telling that the first thing she thinks of when she tells herself to calm down is her brother. It's really sweet that like she cares about him so much and that he cares as well. But, of course, all good things have an end, and she makes a impulsive decision and ends up getting him hit in the face by his bully, you know, in front of his crush, which is super embarrassing for him. He gets really mad, he lashes out, and Sid has a very minor outburst in her room, and she decides, I'm not going to care anymore because the more I care about things and the more I stress about things, it only makes my powers worse. So she's like, you know what? No more caring. I don't care anymore. I'm just gonna throw it all away. And she makes up with her brother very quickly, He doesn't hold it against her, especially after his crush said that she likes tough guys and she gives him a little sticker as like a you did it, which really helps it, but her, trying really hard to, you know, make up with her brother also is probably influencing his decision on that as well. And I think it's really awesome that they have that bond together. But now let's move on to the next character. Brad is a jock that is mostly introduced as just like a stereotype in a way in the beginning of the show, making a joke about sex and stuff in sex ed in a very like unserious way. And we really see that he's not the greatest person when Dina explains why they started dating, where he asked, "Oh, are you a new girl or something?" And she was like, "Go away, Brad." And he's like, "No, but really, I think you're like really attractive." And Sid comments that it's only because she got her braces off and, her boobs grew in that Brad was now interested. Now that she is conventionally attractive, Brad was interested. And it's kind of gross. It does seem like from the beginning, Brad felt like he needed to compete with Sid. He's joining them at hangouts now. And he joined them at the party after he had an ankle injury and pulls Dina away from Sid and like kind of starts an argument to get Dina to follow him and is like, oh, okay, I see how it is. During detention, he tries to, do this truce with Sid, not knowing anything's gonna happen yet, but he's like, we need to do this for Dina's happiness. And of course, Sid's gonna do anything for Dina's happiness, gonna do anything for Dina. She's like, all right, fine, truce. But when she finds out that Brad cheated on Dina, she's not worried about the truce. She's worried about her friend's like actual happiness, not anything to do with Brad, and she tells the truth. And Brad doesn't like that and basically threatens her. Weird, weird guy. I don't like Brad. Oh my god. But at homecoming, which we're almost there, there's just one more thing I need to talk about here. The last relationship Sid has is with herself slash her powers in a way. It's mostly about her powers, but it shows a version of herself that, she's not really confronting. She tries to avoid her powers. She tries to pretend they don't exist for a long time. For I think the first two episodes, she pretends that it is not something that's really happening. She says, "Oh, I almost convinced myself I gave Brad a bloody nose. I almost convinced myself that I broke my wall with just my mind. I almost convinced myself that I pulled a railroad sign out of the ground with just the strength of my hand. No, I didn't do any of that. That's not real. That railroad sign was faulty. The wall is old, and Brad was already going to have a bloody nose. None of it was my fault." So when Sid can't control her powers, it's kind of like they take over her. Like she can do nothing to stop it. She can delay it a bit by leaving the room, by going somewhere else, by, trying to quell it in a way for a little bit until she's alone. But we see in the bathroom that she can stop them from outbursting like they usually do. If she thinks of positive things, if she calms down, if she doesn't get too in her head about it, she can really stop herself from having an outburst and causing a problem. And even further, we see that she can actually control her powers to an extent. Like when she is frustrated with her dad and she can't find a note and she's like, "You know what? I'm going to figure this out." She finds an old trunk of his and breaks it open with her powers, with the power of her mind. And I think that's like interesting that, when given the chance and when she tries to focus, she can control her powers. She can, in a way, control her emotions about this because usually it's kind of like they just happen to her. I do like that it shows this because if given the time, it could have built up to her fully controlling her powers and no longer having outbursts, or her outbursts are very minor uses of her powers, where usually she's pretty good at like doing things how she wants to instead of them happening and her having to deal with the aftermath of people finding out or anything. And I think that would have been really good to build on in a future season. But let's get on to the end of the show and all right, let's talk about Homecoming. So the events lead up to Homecoming are Sid and Dina decide to go together, and Sid and Stan's argument leads Stan to ask someone else to Homecoming. So in the episode that is about homecoming, we first see, Sid and Dina getting ready separately. And Sid's mom comes into her room and says that she's beautiful, helps her zip up her dress, and they have a little heart to heart where Sid apologizes and her mom talks to her about, how her and her dad first met and how it was a really sweet moment and all of that stuff, which is really nice. And, Sid and Dina go together after having a little conversation with Liam that's not really contextually important. And then we move over to see Brad and his friend, whose name I don't remember, talking about, oh, the homecoming game was awesome. And Brad's like, we got crushed 27 to whatever. And, his friend's like, oh, well, we still tried hard. And Brad's like, I don't care. I'm going to go to homecoming. It's going to be mind blowing. He did not know how true that was. Then we go over to see Stan and Mercedes, the girl that he asked out, and she doesn't seem to entertain his, quirkiness like Sid does. He offers her a smoke of weed, and she's like, nope, it's a gateway drug, explains the other stages, and Stan jokingly says, I hope, when she says death is the last one. Obviously, when they get into the homecoming, they separate, and Stan's sitting kind of sadly on the bleachers by himself. And Sid, who's talking to Dina, goes and decides to cheer him up a little bit by talking to him. She explains that while, she really does care for him and love him in a way, it's not the same way that he loves her, and that she hopes they can be friends. He agrees and says, yeah, friends is fine. I still care about you as a person. And so then they both go and join Dina, and they're all talking. They notice the principal staring at them after, the library footage heist that they did. They joke, and then Stan says he needs to go talk to the DJ because the music sucks. Sid and Dina start dancing, and it's really cute. Dina says, I didn't not like the kiss, talking about when they kissed at the party. And it kind of seems like really like, oh my God, hold on here. until they're interrupted by the principal asking for everyone's attention for the homecoming court, which is then interrupted by Brad, who is insanely drunk. You can tell from the way he's talking and from his unstable footing. Oh, that could be from his ankle injury, which we don't know if it's healed yet or not. Um, he shows that he stole Sid's diary and is like, yeah, well, Sid, everyone in her life thinks she's a piece of shit. Um, and it kind of shows flashes of times where she argued with people like Dina, like Stan, like her brother, like her mom. And he's like, yeah. And then while I was downstairs cheating on my girlfriend, he doesn't say cheating on my girlfriend, but that's what he basically says. While I was downstairs cheating on my girlfriend, Sid kissed my girlfriend. And it wasn't like the typical girls kissing for guys' attention. Sid's a full on, and then he says a slur that I'm not going to repeat here. Then, also, this show is set in 2020 when it was filmed. So then he starts to say, and Sid thinks that she has magical powers, but Sid is panicking. Her, anxiety can't take it. She is already like somewhere she didn't want to be. She's with Dina, she's with Stan. Stan tries to stand up for her and be like, hey, dude, shut up. Gets knocked out in one hit. Went down sad. I'm so sorry, Stan, but that is so sad. You went down in one hit. But anyways, um, so Stan is down. Sid and Dina are standing together, and Brad's about to let off this huge information bomb to the whole school, but Sid cannot do it. She can't take it. She panics and explodes his head. Mind blowing for real, right? That's so stupid. Anyways, Sid, after that, she runs off into the night in kind of a anxious, dissociating panic, while Dina stays with the body and Stan, who has just woken up, sees her diary being kicked about of the floor and looks like he's gonna go grab it or something. The show ends with Sid at the top of a watchtower that, we've only seen one or two times with the Shadow Man, who we've also seen like maybe two or three times. He shows up, and if it had ended like that, it could have been anything. Except it ended with both of them talking. It ended with Sid saying, who are you? Should I be afraid? And the man replies, they should be afraid. Let's begin. Which wouldn't be such a problem if it weren't for, we didn't get a season two. We didn't get, the continuation of the story. But since we didn't, I can theorize whatever I want. So let's get into what could have happened for a season two. Starting with the obvious, Sid and this shadow man. They could train her powers. He could end up being a villain or something. It could be he's training her and he's slowly having her go to the dark side. She realizes, and changes her mind and stops working with him or something. The second thing that needs to really be addressed is Brad's death in a way. Like, that man died, and obviously it was a very violent death. So obviously the police are going to be investigating it, and we can figure out whether, the government even knows about people with powers like SIDS, or if that's not a thing that people know about. You know, I just think it would be interesting to see how they investigate the death because obviously people would point their fingers at Sid, but there's no way other people would think that Sid killed him if they didn't know about her powers. The only person that would know is Stan, and I doubt he would tell on Sid. And then we could also explore her relationship with Stan, her relationship with Dina, and possibly even her family once again. Obviously, near the end of Homecoming, Dina and Sid were kind of having a little moment. It kind of seemed like Dina was into Sid as well, so that could be cool. And also, I think would be interesting is if Stan ended up being, kind of an antagonist. If he ends up working with the Shadow Man, if he ends up being evil, to try and get Sid to use her powers, to try and like force her to use them in, more useful ways. If he's, doing things behind the scenes to create situations and, forcing her to act in a way that she wouldn't normally act. I think that would be really interesting. And her family, honestly, her mom was starting to understand her a bit more. She was starting to understand her mom. That would have been a great, connection she could have, another person she could have to confide in, maybe not with her powers, but with just her normal emotions, with, liking her best friend and possibly dating her best friend even. These are things we could have gotten. Instead, we got nothing. We just got a cliffhanger, which I don't know how strong I am. I've been holding on for what, like 5 years now? I'm about to fall. But there's what I thought could happen for the end for season two, maybe. And if you have any other ideas, if you think you can create a better season two than, the quick ideas I threw out there, go ahead and tell me down below. And I'll see you in the next one.